Question 1. Did you enjoy traveling by car when you were a kid?
Not really, to be honest. I used to get car sick quite easily, so I didn't enjoy car journeys that much when I was younger. That said, we didn't travel by car very often anyway, since my family didn't own one at the time. Interestingly, I still felt quite excited before those trips because it usually meant we were going somewhere new. So overall, it was a bit of a love-hate experience.
Question 2. What types of cars do you like?
I'd say I really like Jeeps. I'm quite drawn to their design. They look bold and a bit rugged, which I find very appealing. They also seem quite spacious, so I imagine they'd be more comfortable, especially on longer journeys. I'm particularly interested in models with removable roofs, since you can enjoy fresh air when driving somewhere scenic. I also quite like cars with a small truck bed at the back, as they're really practical for carrying things. So overall, I guess I'm drawn to cars that combine both style and practicality.
Question 3. Do you prefer to be a driver or a passenger?
I'd say I definitely prefer being a passenger. I usually get my sister to drive whenever we go somewhere, although she doesn't always appreciate it. I just find it much more relaxing since I can enjoy the scenery instead of focusing on the road. Also, I've noticed that when I drive for long periods, I sometimes switch to autopilot, which makes me feel a bit uneasy. So, in a way, I'd rather leave the driving to someone else, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Question 4. What do you usually do when there is a traffic jam?
It depends really. If I have time and I know the area well, I'll usually try a different route to avoid traffic. But if I'm in a rush, I'd rather stick to the usual route since it's more predictable. So it mainly comes down to how much time I have and whether I'm familiar with the roads.
Question 5. Do you think car colors are important?
I'd say it depends on the person. For me, it does matter to some extent, since I tend to prefer classic colors like red, white, or black, which don't go out of style. That said, for some people, especially in Asian cultures, color can be more significant. They may choose a car color based on beliefs like horoscopes or luck, thinking it can bring them prosperity. So, overall, while color might be a personal preference for some, for others it can carry a deeper cultural meaning. I've always wanted to do a motorbike trip from the south to the north of Vietnam, although I haven't had the chance to actually do it yet. Ideally, I'd go with a few close friends who share the same interest in traveling and exploring. If none of them are available, I'd probably join a travel group online, like on Facebook, and go with people who are planning a similar trip.
I think the journey itself would be an incredible experience. I get to enjoy some of the most scenic routes in the country, such as the High Van Pass, as well as other mountainous and forested areas along the way. What I like most is the flexibility. I could stop whenever I want, explore small towns or villages, and experience a slower, more traditional way of life, which really appeals to me.
When it comes to timing, I haven't decided yet, mainly because it would require quite a lot of time and money. I'd probably need at least a month to do it properly, and I'd have to take a break from work, which might affect my income and career plans. That said, it's definitely something I'd love to do in the future when I have more freedom. I think it would be not just a trip, but a really meaningful experience.
Question 1. Which form of vehicle is more popular in your country, bikes, cars, or motorcycles?
I'd say motorbikes are still the most common form of transport, although cars are becoming more popular these days. The main reason is that motorbikes are much more affordable and practical, especially in busy cities. They're cheaper to buy, easier to maintain, and more convenient in heavy traffic. Cars, on the other hand, are usually seen as a sign of financial stability, so people tend to buy them when they can afford it. They're also more comfortable, especially for families. So, in a way, people use motorbikes out of necessity, but see cars as something to aspire to.
Question 2.
Do you think air pollution comes mostly from mobile vehicles?
I'd say vehicles are a big contributor, especially in cities, but they're probably not the only main source. For instance, with so many cars and motorbikes on the road every day, the amount of exhaust released into the air is quite significant. That said, industrial activity is also a major factor. Because of high demand for goods, factories operate on a large scale and consume a lot of energy, often from fossil fuels. So overall, air pollution doesn't come from just one source, it's more the result of both everyday transport and large-scale production.
Question 3. Do you think people need to change the way of transportation drastically to protect the environment?
Yes, I'd say so, to a large extent. The way people travel contributes quite a lot to environmental issues, especially air pollution. For instance, if people rely less on private vehicles and use public transport instead, it can make a noticeable difference. Even small changes like carpooling can help. The thing is, if enough people make these changes, the overall impact can be quite significant. So I think it really comes down to collective behavior rather than just individual effort.
Question 4. How are the transportation systems in urban areas and rural areas different?
I'd say transport systems in cities are much more developed than in rural areas. That's mainly because there's a much higher demand in urban areas, so governments are more willing to invest in things like buses or metro systems. In rural areas, however, there are fewer people and everything is more spread out, so it's harder and more expensive to build large-scale transport systems. Because of that, people in the countryside usually rely more on private vehicles. So overall, there's quite a clear gap between urban and rural areas in terms of transport infrastructure.